Thank you. It's a great honor to be speaking at the archives. On the basis of the introduction that I was given, some of you may wonder why a Tuscaloosa boy, whose wife's ambition was to teach Shakespeare at the University of Alabama, wound up serving as Selma's unofficial historian. Unofficial because I don't get paid. A current mayor offered to make me official, and I said, "Oh, you mean you'll start paying me?" He said, "Alston." So I'm happy to remain unofficial. I wandered into historical research when I was teaching at Northwestern and earning the money to go back to graduate school at the University of Chicago and get the PhD. One of my students, my only black student, came up to me and asked if there wasn't some course at Northwestern that she could take to learn about her own people and culture. She said, "I've been in school for 13 years and I've never read a single word written by anyone the same color as me." I said, "Oh, well, golly, Angela, I see your problem. I've been in school for 16 years and I haven't read a single word written by anyone of your color, but I'm sure there's a course somewhere at Northwestern. I'll check around and find it for you." Well, this was 68. Northwestern liberals had gone beyond civil rights. They went into Vietnam and other causes. And their response to my queries was, "Well, also sounds like a wonderful idea. Why don't you take a few days and get up a course?" I did not think in the 60s in Evanston, Illinois, that a pale male like me with my accent and my background as a descendant of slaveholders, I did not think that would go over, and I thought it would be a bad mistake. But while I was still talking myself out of it, Dr. King's assassination, I heard about it on one side of the Midway, and I was crossing the Midway to go to a student party I'd been invited to. And I knew it was my imagination, but it looked overhead, it was almost dusk, so the stars were going out one by one by one. And I didn't think I could do a great job, but I had to do something. And I had to get into black history, which of course is American history. Don't teach the literature. And in due time, I wound up back at the University of Alabama teaching Shakespeare and African-American literature. And after that, I wound up in the Selma doing PR and fundraising for the Edmundite Missions. And made the same discovery here that what I'd learned from Angela also applied. People did not know the history. It was not just outsiders. You sort of expected them to show up on any anniversary to know to be asked to be shown the graveyard where all the folks who were killed on Bloody Sunday were buried, or to be shown shown the church that was blown up and killed the little girls. It was sometimes very hard to convince people that every atrocity and racial atrocity of the past century took place in one small little town in Alabama. But you get used to that. What is distressing is that even your friends, those fellow Alabamians who know something, have funny ideas. I was one of the first history conferences I attended here at the archives, wonderful presentation on the Klan. Toward the end of it, Judge Val McGee stood up and appealed to the group there. He was planning to write a novel about the Civil War in Selma, which was going to be climaxed by a showdown between his hero and the Ku Klux Klan on the streets of Selma in 1865. But he'd been doing research and he couldn't find out anything about the Klan in Selma in 65. And nobody at the group could help him. And he says, no Klan? Why not? I figured, well, amateur or not, I didn't speak up. So I got up and said, well, Judge McGee, there are two things. One is that the population of Selma and Dallas County was 85 to 90% black in 1865. It would make about as much sense to organize the Klan there as organizing a Klan in Harlem. So it would be, in other words, it would be extremely dangerous. And the second problem was that the leaders of the black community, including Ben Turner, who was going to be elected to Congress, were all campaigning to have the Confederate leaders' civil rights restored so that they could vote and hold office. And it would be incredibly dumb to undercut their efforts. This seemed to satisfy. But then after the conference, a man from Tennessee came up to me and says, well, that was very interesting, but what was going on with the Klan in Selma in 1923? Oh God. There must have been a mention of something dreadful. But then when I asked a few more questions, he said, well, there was this full-page ad in the Selma Times-Journal telling the Klan to stay out of Selma. I said, could you give me the date on that? And who signed this? And he called. A week later, I got a call from Tennessee saying, yeah, it was in 23, and he had the date. Then he started reading off the names. The head of Rotary, the head of Kiwanis, the head of the Selma Bar, Edmund Pettis. Oh, I said, you don't need to read any more. That is, the establishment has spoken. They do not want the Klan in Selma. And I got to read the ad, which is full of dramatic language. It's almost worth buying the book to get the language. But again, in the Klan was at its height, actually, in Alabama in the mid-20s. It elected a governor, Bibb Graves, a senator, Mr. Hill, and the other senator was already notorious for his opposition to education for blacks, votes for women, and the Catholic Church in general. And when the Democratic Party nominated Al Smith, who was not only a Catholic, but a believer and an opponent of prohibition, and from New York City, home of Tammany Hall. It took tooth and nail. Half of Alabama Democrats rose in rebellion. How could they vote for such a man? And Edmund Pettis, the grandson, not the general, held together practically with duct tape what he could of the party, and tooth and nail, and carried the state for Al Smith. His granddaddy hadn't liked the Klan either. But there were these things that folks should have known. They're just simply not known, not out there. There are a number of books written about Selma, and John Hardy's Selma, Her Institutions and Her Men, back in 1879, is very good on the early history, except the closer it gets to the present, the more nervous it gets. Mr. Hardy was a radical Republican, and by the time he wrote this book, his cause had been defeated. And he tiptoed around various subjects. He had, God bless him, 2 of its 200 pages are devoted to the colored population and its institutions, and which is devoted mostly to listing the black churches and giving a little information about each. And what it has is valuable. It just doesn't have very much. The next book about Selma, Walter Jackson's 1954, The Story of Selma. Walter Jackson was superintendent of schools in Selma for many years and did a lot of digging. This is an enormously valuable book. But it actually has less about the colored population of Selma than Hardy's 2 pages. And he's not good on women either. That's one point in he devotes a lot of attention to white male Confederate heroes, Morgan, Pettus, etc. And at one point he notes, in 1872, John Tyler Morgan, Charles William Shelley, and Edmund Pettus all ran for the legislature from Dallas County. But the white man's day was not yet. A Negro, a carpetbagger, and a scalawag won the post. Which leaves me thinking, well, what Negro? What carpetbagger? What scalawag? What's the rest of the story? The Negro who actually defeated Edmund Pettus, I think the only time Pettus ever lost, was Jeremiah Harrelson, who was the last black man elected to Congress during Reconstruction in Alabama. And an extremely colorful character. I got a call once from someone who was very active in Selma politics who demanded that I write an article about Jeremiah Harrelson. I said, well, but Rose, he was a crook. She said, yes, and the people of Selma need to know that he was a crook. And it doesn't matter how black you are, you don't elect crooks. I said, yes, ma'am. There are a lot of different lessons that you can learn from history. But Jackson's phrase, the white man's day was not yet. White women doesn't get much attention from him. I could run through a list of women who did significant things in Selma during this period, founded a hospital, built a school. It just simply didn't exist as far as Mr. Jackson was concerned. And of course there was the small matter of the women's suffrage movement, which as far as Alabama is concerned was born in 1910 in the Carnegie Library, when Mary Winslow Partridge gathered together ladies who, like her, believed that women deserved to vote. It's 1910. 1911, Birmingham joined in. They gradually got an organization. And by 1922, the woman was actually elected to the Alabama legislature, Harriet Hooker Wilkins, from Selma. You think Miss Wilkin, any of those suffragettes makes the story of Selma? Oh, you sweet, naive souls. It might never have happened. In fact, perhaps that was how he felt it, that it shouldn't have happened. But so much gets left out, which is something I blundered into when I started doing research on Alabama's first black congressman, Ben Turner, who turned out is buried in Live Oak Cemetery, not that far from various Confederate generals. And when I first went to the Chamber of Commerce to share with them my excitement that we had this black congressman buried there, the response like, Turner, who was this? And I said, well, he was the first black congressman. And the lady behind the desk blanched, and she said, the Yankees did that just to humiliate us. Alston, if you write about Selma, write about the happy things in our life. And I said, well, for example, she said, oh, like when the Yankees burned us to the ground. I said, well, I had to go out and do a lot of digging to win over that lady, though once she realized that Turner had fought to get amnesty for the old Confederate leaders. Well, don't mind. You can say a few words about Mr. Turner. He was a good sort. Yeah, he was a good sort, but you did have to, the legend of Reconstruction that I and most of us grew up with, it was ghastly and one-sided. For that matter, and this was something I ran into a lot, but the problems were not just simply with the white community being resistant to history or not having a very rigid view of history. I had these black heroines that I was going, in effect, going to sell to the community. A lot of blacks sort of looked at me and thought, what's this white boy up to now? I really ran into this when I was trying to get some justice for Sophie Kingston. Miss Kingston founded a school in the east side of Selma, very neglected, very poor neighborhood, commandeered the shop class at Knox, marched them across town, and had them help her build a two-story building where she could teach the children. This was in 1904, and she continued to do this in 1922 when she was about worn out. And during her lifetime, it was the Kingston School. But the city finally took it over, and it became just East End Elementary. No drama there. And I started saying, well, how about going back to being the Kingston School? Wouldn't it be good to have a school named after a teacher, someone who really cared about education? And I was running to a real lack of enthusiasm, and it was finally a friend took me aside and said, Alston, black folks, if someone's not going to name a school after some white woman just because she gave money to build the school. I said, well, no, Sophie Kingston was black. The founder of the school was black. He's Alston. Black people don't found schools. Hello. Selma is the Athens of Black Alabama. It has Selma University, which was founded by the Black Baptists. It had Payne School, which was founded by the Black Methodists. It has Concordia, that was basically founded by a Black Lutheran lady, Rosa Young, who, of course, does not exist in Mr. Jackson's history. And, and I kept running into this. And after all, and the feeling was, well, a white boy, obviously he has a black hero. I've got a bunch of heroes and heroines. And finally, the chief of the fire department got involved, and he took over the campaign. By golly, we have the Kingston School now, but we would never have got it if it just been this white boy touting his historical researches. It does rattle me occasionally that should make so much difference. I got a call from a lady needed all kinds of historical information, none of which had anything to do, as far as I could see, with race. And about 5 minutes of the conversation, she said, "Are you white or are you black?" So, what? I'm trying to figure out what. And apparently I paused too long because she said, "Oh my God, you mean you have to stop and think about it?" And those of you who don't know me won't believe this, but I got so rattled, I actually checked the back of my hand. I'm Caucasian. I'm a lovely shade of Caucasian. So there. But there's so much history in Selma, that's so much of the history of the state in miniature, but also, epic adventures during Reconstruction, the women's suffrage, just the survival through the Depression and the traumas. I was drafted to become, on the basis of my research on Ben Turner, I was recruited to write a Selma Queen City of the Black Belt back in '89. The city council called me in and announced that they were going to give me 6 months to research and write the history of Selma. We were doing part-time, since I still had a full-time job with the Edmundite Missions. And I was a little rattled, but my wife pointed out that if I didn't do it when I could, the opportunity might never come again. So for 6 months, every other Saturday, I packed up Ann and my 3 daughters, who were at that age where I think 11, 13, and 15, and went over the archives, each of whom had an assignment. Okay, Wanda, you researched John Tyler Morgan. Mary Alston, you work on the Depression. Rufus, you're just going to run errands. And they were wonderful, actually, though Rufus, God bless her, we were pulling out of the head for Montgomery for, I think, the next to last time, he said, Daddy Spike, who lives down the street, his parents never take him to the archives. He said, "Oh, poor Spike. We'll have to do something nice for him." I was blessed. But I could not help feeling as I was racing through self-educating and exploiting my children, that it'd be nice someday to come back and to do a decent job, to really have the time to dig, consult more than one source, and get the rest of the story. I felt like I was, just doing the top of the wave. And in retirement, the University of Alabama Press has given me the opportunity to tell the story at least a lot better than I told it back in 1989. It's a good story. It's a good story. It's a lot of stories. And I think this is the point at which I'm supposed to pause and ask for questions. Yes.
Do you claim your history is well balanced? Because it seems to be a little bit slanted from your talk here.
I tried to be fair, but I don't think I achieved complete balance. I mean, in the section on the Civil War, I quote Jefferson Davis first of all, and then also quote the Vice President of the Confederacy and various folks in the Selma paper of the period. Most folks arguing that the war was all about slavery, and those arguing that it had nothing to do with slavery. I try to give some sense of both of the arguments for leaving the Union and the arguments against. And occasionally I would incline toward the Unionists, but I couldn't resist adding the major argument offered by the Unionist newspaper in Selma, which was that the South didn't need to be afraid of an idiotic imbecile like Abraham Lincoln. Ooh. It's poor judge of character there. I don't. Is there any particular area in which you suspect me of being unbalanced?
No, well, you talk mainly about the black history, and I'm sure you're fair, but I wonder if you touch on, the white history also to the degree.
Oh, I'm very glad you asked that. Yeah, I know I spent a lot of time on John Tyler Morgan and Edmund Pettus and on the white heroes, if that's the word. There, of course, so much of the work had already been done. Jackson does a great deal of good work on Morgan particularly. Now, I occasionally have a little different slant on Morgan. I was interested that he was campaigning to make a Hawaii a state at a time when most Southern senators were bitterly opposed to letting Hawaii be a state. White folks are a minority in Hawaii. Got all these Asians over there. Morgan wanted, Morgan pretty much alone. The Mobile Register is good as called him senile for suggesting such a thing, that Hawaii should be a state. If Hawaii had never become a state, could Obama have been president?
No.
Yeah, well, one of the heroes of the Citizens Council warned as one of the dire fates that if we had integration, it would lead to presidential assassination and a black president. Which we had without an assassination. Yes. I did stress the black issue because it had been left out, and I had to dig myself, or send my daughters to dig. And so, when you have work on something personally and had to do original research, you're a little more. It's hard not to be a little more emotionally involved. But I think I tried to give the rest of the story as best I could. Yes.
If you have any other questions, let's bring you a microphone since we're recording. Amy, can you reach?
If the war between the states was just about slavery, cotton was king, the North was taxing the South real heavy, there was a lot more to it. And if the war was over just slavery, why is it that Ulysses S. Grant kept his slaves after the Emancipation Proclamation and he said good help is hard to find? Why did so many, the North did not honor the freedom of slaves for a year or more, a lot of states after the South, but the South was under that. And when the Union came in, they did burn and destroy slave quarters and rape and kill the slaves just the same as the white people.
These arguments are stated by people I quote in the book. Although I don't believe Ulysses Grant is taxed with, except I left out Mr. Grant. But read the book. I state the arguments that most Confederate soldiers were not slaveholders. We freed his slaves, for example, before the Emancipation Proclamation. You can make a case, but of course there are so many statements of the folks at the time who claim that slavery is the point of the war. The vice president of the Confederacy sings a different song from the president. The Vice President Stevens, brags that the Confederacy is the first nation in the history of the world built on the premise of human inequality. And John Tyler Morgan says that the right to own and hold slaves is the basis of what we're doing. I don't say these folks are right. I don't say these folks are wrong. I cite both the arguments, which I suppose is what you should. I try to give balance. Yes.
Alston, you mentioned some very interesting characters that you find in the book, but from your research, who is the most interesting person that you think is in part of the story of Selma, and who is the most influential person to come out of Selma through history?
Ooh. Well, I don't think the most interesting person was the most influential, but I think probably John Tyler Morgan, I think, was probably the most influential. He was sort of the leader of the Southern Bloc, and he was able to kill federal aid to education for a century. I find Edmund Pettus a more interesting character, partly because he is so much the old school of honor that I would like to have known more. He could be a little crotchety. His traveling salesman from, I believe, Chicago once addressed him as Ed. And he drew himself up to his full 6'6". He said, "Young man, I have friends who call me Judge Pettus, and I have friends who call me General Pettus, and I have some friends who call me Senator Pettus, but there are damn few who call me Ed." But on a sort of different level, I would Ben Turner. I mean, a former slave who went to Congress and, and fought to get amnesty for leaders like Pettus. The year in which Turner was, the year in which Pettus got his rights, and he could run and hold office again. He ran for the state senate from Dallas County and was defeated. It's the same year that Ben Turner was defeated because there were more than the carpetbaggers were persuaded another black politician to run, and it split the black vote, and let a Mobile man named Bromberg go to Congress. I've always, at the time, Southern Argus said, you know, maybe we should have made a deal to support Ben for Congress if his folks would support Pettis for the state Senate. Well, yes, that might have made, and in some respects would have been a dream team. One would like to have seen what could come out of that. There were efforts periodically to bridge the gap between the races and the politics, none of which quite succeeded. But you have to honor the folks who tried.
Do you have any other questions?
Can you talk about the mayor that was dug up and reburied several times? I think it was one time on the plantation, then in the city, then back on the plantation.
That was Vice President King. Well, while he had a plantation at King's Bend, where he was initially buried. But then King's Bend was in decline. You know, cotton was not king like it had been, and Selma was getting decided, well, by golly, it would like to have its founder and who founded the city and named the city on their turf. And so supposedly on occasion when whoever had inherited King's Bend was offered a barbecue, the group from the enterprising Selmians dug up King and carried him into the specially built mausoleum in Live Oak Cemetery. That's the story as it was told to me, at any rate. I haven't tried to check out any newspaper versions yet. Some stories you don't want to check. Yes.
Mr. Fitts, you spoke about Mr. Pettis a lot, and I want to ask you a question. How do you feel about the views of some concerned citizen who wanted to change the name of the bridge from a great man like Mr. Pettis?
Well, I can understand their feelings, especially since there's been there was one writer who claimed that Pettis had been Grand Dragon in '75, in which the Klan had disbanded by that point, so I don't know what the charge was there. I find it hard, if you want to argue that Pettis was a white supremacist. He was very conservative in his racial views, so he did a certain amount of noblesse oblige. But he could, if he was a Grand Dragon during Reconstruction in Selma, what the hell was he doing? I mean, Selma, you know, had black policemen with the Mobile, the first place in the state. And the indication of that were that some whites were indignant about that, and Pettis squashed any attempt to protest or to raise Cain about that. He, of course, was openly praised Ben Turner, you know, first black congressman from Alabama. You know, there was one attempted lynching that he could have turned into a race riot that he broke up almost single-handedly. I I think for myself, I would keep the name of the bridge simply for its historical value. I mean, you could argue that there are people who might be more deserving of the honor, but he's the one who's had the honor, and it's the way what's in the history books. And folks come to Selma, they want to march over the bridge, not the bridge to freedom. Edmund Pettus Bridge on their way to freedom. I don't know. But you see how hard it is to be balanced.
Another question right here.
Yeah.
Alston, thank you for the years of research that's gone into this book and your work. Having spent this much time thinking about Selma's past and on the occasion of its bicentennial and the state's bicentennial, what are your thoughts about the future of Selma as a community, its resources and its challenges?
I think Selma has not yet learned to use its history as resourcefully as it might. Every year we celebrate our pain. We reenact the Battle of Selma and Bloody Sunday. But the reenactment of the battle plays to a white audience. But this was actually the battle that freed the blacks of Selma and Dallas County. And I can't help thinking there should be some way to stage the reenactment that would highlight this. Heck, you could have somebody dress up as Ben Turner and read his speech to Congress about the sufferings of the people of Selma, who had those of every hue and every shade joined together, and to rebuild the shattered temples of this grand and glorious republic. You could recruit Ben Turner for the Confederate reenactments. That matter, there's enough good actors in the white community to help with the reenactment of the Civil Rights Movement. I know several whites who would make fantastic Sheriff Clarks. And then actually at one point, Ms. Sanders did suggest that the whites could dress up as the Clark's posse and attack folks at the bridge. But I can sort of understand how folks not wanting to do that. When they had the movie, they were able to recruit white extras to be state troopers, but not to be in the posse. That was vocal folks who had disgraced themselves, and that was just too painful to touch. But I think more could be done to pull the whole audience, the whole community together behind the history. And of course, I think history is a cure for practically everything.
Could you bring me up to date on the Jewish community? I read the Montgomery Advertiser, and at one time there were enough Jews in Selma they built a synagogue and were very active. And I read a recent article, it's almost either one or no Jews. I don't know if the synagogue's going to be going on.
There are only 8 Jews left in Selma, I'm sorry to say. On the rare occasion when we have a visiting rabbi to have services, we have to call on all the righteous among the Gentiles, well, fortunately, even in the reduced state, the Jewish community has a lot of friends. It's a beautiful synagogue, Temple Mishkan, Israel, which they've people who have left Selma long ago occasionally send in checks to help it maintain it. But I think the 8 Jews that are left mostly come over to Montgomery to attend services at Bethor. You do what you can with what you've got left. The Jewish history let me share something with you. When the Klan was at the height of its power in the 20s, the Grand Dragon was actually planning to attack the American Legion for not being 100% American. And what had the Legion done to displease the Klan? It had chosen Moritz Froelich, a Jewish lawyer from Selma, to represent the Alabama on the National Convention of the Legion. And I think the Times Journal heard about that the Klan was going to go after Froelich in Selma, and they began their crusade against the hooded horrors of the Klan. But of course, of the history, Selma's had 3 different Jewish mayors, but alas, like their children have gone off to college and have never come back. Yes.
What brought so many Jews to Selma to settle in the first place?
Well,
Do you know?
Well, they needed a place to establish a trade, and Selma was that was rich back when cotton was king. That was a good place to have a business, and it was a river city, and then it was a railroad city, and they had some of the early Jewish settlers who, made a difference, and more followed. And Selma was fairly welcoming when, the Jews had to flee Germany, flee Eastern Europe. You could usually find a place for them in Selma. Of course, it's not true of every community.
All right, if we have no further questions, we'll go ahead and call it a day. Thank you again, Mr. Fitts, for coming and speaking.
Thank you.